He's truly a great poet.
As long as you're on translations,
you can read his poems in translation, but of course Urdu is a great language. Within subcontinent, I think Urdu is like Italian. If you just speak, it sounds like poetry, and if you sing, then of course it's immediately lyrical music. It's a great language. Pardon me? His name, I'll write it down. Then you can find him. Actually, there is a great interview by him with subtitles in English on YouTube. If you're interested, send me an email and I'll send you the URL. Yeah, it's quite interesting. His first name and his last name are the same. Okay, and let me see what we have. Okay, as long as we are on the subject of music, and I'm going to focus on film and resistance. It's interesting, people with all these things about India that now are becoming popular. Of course, whenever that happens, anybody who is perceptive knows that there's a lot of mythology there, and also new mythologies are being created commercially. But there was a time when Bollywood was both commercial and quite progressive, and India, like in Italy, for example, immediately after the war, had a group of very serious, engaged, talented filmmakers, and some of those films now may be available in English. I know there is a film called Mother India, which you can find with English subtitles. And this movie is an earlier one made by the same filmmaker, Mehboob Khan. No, not related to me, but he made some really great Bollywood-style film, and he had some great music directors to work on his film. This film, which is called Aan, A-A-N, would be the closest in English to transliterate. It may be loosely translated as Pride. Really deals with this class conflict in the rural areas. You have as a protagonist the landlord group, and there he makes it complex. It's not that landlords are all evil. The father actually is elderly and kind of a patriarch who is or who tries to be kind to the peasants, whereas his nephew, who is the younger generation, is much more brutal and cunning. And on the other side, you have the representative of the peasants, who is this dashing young man, and all kinds of Bollywood things take place in the film, which I don't need to go into. Interestingly, he actually involves women of the village. It is simply not true that women who work anywhere, I think, but this is certainly true in South Asia. They don't have the time or the facilities or the inclination to practice this purda, to veil their faces or to be coy, because they have to work. They have to work in the fields to feed their families. And they have their own culture. And although this is stylized, this particular song is partly kind of a love song, but there are fairly obvious symbols of solidarity among the peasants, militancy. By the way, in the old days, just like in Europe and in this country too, the peasants actually were armed, not with very sophisticated weapons, but they had their arms. So this woman who comes carrying a sword is not just doing it for show business, although partly it is show business, but really it depicts a reality of ordinary people. Although I'm not a person who supports American Rifle Society, I'm for gun control. I do see where some of those people in this country come from, who want to have their arms and who believe in right to bear arms. But modern reality is very different from the way it used to be in those days. So I think we have to think about those things somewhat differently today. But anyway, this is set in early 20th century rural India, and the conflict is between the landlords and the peasants. So we can play a few bars of this song. Can we advance this? Oh. Okay.
It's not uploading fast enough. Is this the same one?
Okay. You have two of them? Yeah. You can. You have two of them. Yeah. Okay, I think you get the message. And I think the one point is that popular culture is not something that we should neglect. we are part of it, first of all. And if you are a talented person, you can actually make a lot with popular culture that can at the same time engage people at various levels and work on their unconscious more than their conscious part. The development of consciousness is a very complicated process in any society at any time. I, for one, both like popular culture and even as I have a critical consciousness, I try to always think how to take it to the next level. And it is possible to do so. The next thing, since we are on Bollywood and move into the film as a language, some of which we have covered, is it's an interview of Shabana Azmi, who is a great actress, but also social and political activist in India. She is also a member of the upper house of Indian Parliament, and in her youth, she still looks very young, but she's older than I am. She was a great activist and worked in the slums of Mumbai, today's Mumbai. And I don't know if she talks about that here. But this was an interview done, I think, a few years ago. And she can speak for herself. She's a very articulate woman. So without waiting any longer.
Because even before you became a politician, if you like, a member of parliament, you were already an activist. In 1986, you actually went on hunger strike to support Mumbai's slum dwellers there. And I wonder, I mean, you got to see the government from the inside. I wonder, in 1986, when you were doing this hunger strike with others, how you regarded the dealing with the sort of lumbering bureaucracy of the government.
Well, I think it's much more than just the bureaucracy. It's also the state and policies of the state that need to be confronted, and you need to get them to hear the voice of those at the grassroots. Oftentimes, I think the problem happens because the policymakers are so far removed from those who are at the grassroots, and that disconnect leads to policies which often are harmful to the very people they want to be helpful to. So I think it's a very important space for people working at the grassroots to actually actively get into parliament where legislation is formed and policies are made, so that they're informed by the grassroots. And I think the fact that I came from that actually strengthened my position in being able to affect change.
And in fact, I think obviously your reputation grew very strong because you were not only just doing the mainstream indie movies, you were actually outside in the world of theatre, as you mentioned and we talked about, but also a couple of Hollywood productions, 1992, City of Joy, for example. By the way, how did you find that? The difference between working in the East and the West?
At that time, the first film I did was in 1989 with Shirley MacLaine called Madame Suzatska, which was directed by John Schlesinger. And at that time, it was a very different space in India, because we used to work like in 12 films at one time. And John Schlesinger said, I cannot even believe that you can do something as insane as that. And the standards of work were very different, because we worked out of an improvised script. We didn't have a script. We had only a story and all of that. And India works with such few resources, and we work with the system always failing. It makes us really innovative and creative, and we're always able to, that's why we call ourselves the Jugadis, you know, we're able to sort of cobble things up together. So it was a learning experience for both.
And of course, you're not scared to stir it up, and a very controversial role you took on was in 1996 in Deepa Mehta's film Fire, where I think it was the first lesbian scene on screen on Indian cinema. And I know that you had great acclaim for that and awards, but there was also rioting, there was, there were attacks and threats and so on. Was there any long-term backlash, you think, on your career for taking on that role?
The film ran for 3 weeks really successfully, and the audiences had a very good response to the film. And then the political party, the Shiv Sena, which is a very right-wing political party, decided to take political mileage and pull the film off the theatres and indulged in all kinds of violence, etc. But I must give it to the censor board. The film was re-referred to the censor board, and the censor board again put it back into the theatres. What happened in the wake of Fire being removed from theatres is that civil society responded with such a sense of outrage at a political party that had no business to sort of impress its extra constitutional powers on the public. And they said, we're not going to have a party dictate to us, this is what we can see, this is what we can hear, this is what we can watch, because it has gone through the due process of film certification. And so there were lots of spontaneous protests in favor of the film. And I think it was really the victory of civil society that the film came back into the theatres. So in fact, it really helped my career, because Fire in that sense has become a cult film. And for me, what was important is, when I was doing the film, it's not as though I wasn't aware that it would raise some kind of controversy. But again, I figured that not all of India is a monolith. And some people would be outraged, some people would be moved, some people would question, but basically a process of questioning would start, which is really all that art can do. You know, art can create a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur.
You have a wonderful collection of awards, so both for your acting and for your socialism, social activism. You have, the Padma Shri from the government of India, the Yash Bhartiya from the government of Uttar Pradesh, and of course all the acting awards. To what degree do these awards and these recognitions allow you to, or empower you to go out and do the things you want to do?
Well, a great deal. I mean, the fact that I have won 5 national awards for my acting, and the International Gandhi Peace Prize, which I got at the House of Lords in London, and the Crystal Award along with Michael Douglas, obviously gives you a lot of leverage. The fact that it is your work, not only in the movies, but also within the social activist sphere, gives you a lot of credibility and makes you reach powers that be, that respect what you've done and are available to you when you want to knock at the doors.
Who have been your mentors? Who's really influenced you in your life, apart from your parents?
Many people. In film, I would say my director, Shyam Benegal, with whom I started my work. He has been a huge influence. I think he shaped my aesthetics and the choice of films that I made. That in turn, the choice of films that I made also went about contributing to my image.
Your strongly held principles of non-violence have actually made you quite a vocal opponent to religious extremism. And I know that it's caused backlash for you from Hindus and Muslims and all sides. To what degree you don't believe in the concept of a clash of civilizations, do you? To what degree do you think is causing it?
I reject it entirely, and I think it is a construct. We need to understand that it is a clash of two worldviews. One that embraces extremism, and the other that accepts pluralism and tolerance. The fight to me is not between Hindus and Muslims, or between the Western world and the Eastern world. The fight is really between a point of view, and it's time civil society stopped watching from the sidelines and decided that Hindus need to fight Hindu extremists. Muslims need to find Muslim extremists. We need to posit them against, within their own community, rather than against each other. Because the extremist Hindu and the extremist Muslim are really each other's best friends and mirror each other. And the liberal Hindu and the liberal Muslim need to be on the same side. And if we understand that, then we'll get to the bottom of all this confusion that is happening.
But in terms of religion, what does it mean to your life? What role does it play in your life?
I was brought up in a communist atmosphere, so there was a complete absence of religion. But I think religion is a private matter, and it's too potent a weapon to be left to the zealots alone. And so it is very important to seek out the moderate liberal voices amidst religious leaders and get them to speak the language of peace, because I don't think that the world has a choice today except to speak the language of peace.
Shivanji, what goals have you set yourself, long-term and short-term? What do you want to achieve?
You know, I don't have goals that keep changing, because if you're looking for something as vast as social justice, it's not going to occur overnight, because of course legislation will help in fighting oppression will help. But ultimately, it's also about mindset transformation. And in a patriarchal society like India, that's a long time coming. My father, Kefi Azmi, said something very interesting to me once. I said, don't you get frustrated when change does not occur at the pace that you want it to? And he said, when you're working for change, you need to build into that expectation the possibility that change might not occur within your lifetime. But you must have the conviction that if you carry on working sincerely, then change will come, even if it does after you're gone. That is really my mantra.
That's a rare long-term view, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
How would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
Okay, well, you can hear what her answer to that question is, which is interesting also. She mentions her father, Kaifi Azmi, who was also a great poet, and he was a friend with Faiz Ahmad Faiz. That generation was truly a great generation. Everywhere, it seems to me, when I look around the world, there's a lot to be inspired by. The history of film, of course, is a vast one. We are focusing on films that are aware and try to make others aware at a social and political level of oppression of many kinds and problems of poverty. You have to remember that for countries, that were colonized and did not have their own industrial base, making anything modern really is a tremendous challenge. As Shabana Azmi was talking about, her working in 12 movies at any one time in India, where they don't even have the script ready for you, and things are almost extempore. Certainly there's a lot of temporization. You kind of solve the problems as they arise and write the script as you move along. It's really quite a challenge. But after the war, even Italy, for example, was in the same situation. And they made some really great films at that time. If we have time, I want to show you one or two snippets of the great Italian neo-realist films. But in South Asia, people were very much inspired, especially by the Italian filmmakers after the war. Especially people like Antonioni and Vittorio De Sica, his great film, The Bicycle Thief. It probably is, in one level, the greatest film ever made so far. Anyway, they inspired people like Satyajit Ray, about whom you have read, and whose films you may have seen or may be inspired to see after this class. But Bengal at that time was divided in 1947, and the generation that grew up then also included a number of filmmakers. And the films that they made were made under very difficult circumstances in the 50s and 60s and 70s. In my childhood, I was fortunate to have been involved with some of those things. This film, which we are about to see parts of, was made by Fateh Lohani, who was a great dramatist and filmmaker and actor, musician also. His sister was the first Muslim woman to sing professionally and publicly against a great deal of opposition from her class, as you can imagine. It is ironic that peasant women have always been more free in these societies than middle class or upper class women. One, of course, can think about that a great deal in the context of history of women in particular. This film is really about a woman, and this woman, whose name is the title of the film, she comes from a poorer family within the village, and she grows up under control of men and also being oppressed by them, including the religious figure who also runs the local school and beats her and other students, I suppose. And it's working under tremendous handicaps. The film actually has a very interesting structure. It begins and ends with the same sequence, same sequence of shots. And like in race films or in Italian films of this period or Japanese films by the great director Ozu especially, train is a very living symbol of modernity and usually the dark side of modernity. In Gandhi has this famous tirade against trains in his very first book called Hind Swaraj, which is roughly translated as Freedom for India or Free India. But of course, trains have many different aspects. Interestingly, if you read one small poem by Emily Dickinson, not published in her lifetime, I think, about trains, you get the same feeling that she didn't like trains very much. And her treatment really is much more than just trains. I mean, it's modernity that she is criticizing from a very acute and sensitive perspective. So anybody who tries to think carefully about modernity thinks about trains. So it opens like that, and then we are shown some sequences from her childhood, and then as she grows up, and then she ends because she cannot actually marry the boy she loved and who loved her through very complicated village politics and village political economy. At the end, she is driven to suicide, which is treated also very delicately. It's actually a very good film when I see this, and if I ever have some time, maybe I will try to restore it with the help of competent people. I think it's worth restoring. Anyway, we will go through a few sequences, quick ones, and that will summarize in the language of film what I just told you. Part one, yeah. Good sound. There should be. Yeah. Okay. Okay. There. Yeah. Okay. Go to the next. Go to the next one. Anyway, this sequence ends by these kids actually burning down the school of the religious leader, for which, of course, they are punished. But because this boy comes from an upper